Well, hello and welcome back to class. It's Leadership 813, Leading in the 21st Century. This week we're going to be moving past the specific styles that we've been exploring for the past 4 weeks, and we're going to move into how you test these and how you show that one particular approach may do something that another approach doesn't do. So here we have our reading list for week 6, and my choice, my criterion for putting things on this list was, number one, are they challenging an existing leadership style that's been promoted, a theory? Are they challenging it and coming up with reasons why it might be questioned? And number two, it made the list if it was a study, meaning that they took a particular theory and they went out and applied it in a particular survey or experiment to see whether the proposed relationships of that theory actually held up. So what you'll find is a little bit of a mixture, but mainly what I'm trying to do now is to focus on the next phase of research. The first phase, of course, is knowing what's out there, understanding the theories. But the second phase is when you come up with your own ideas, how do you go about showing that your ideas are actually valid? And so I think you should begin to pay attention to how these studies are set up, how the data is collected, how the data is analyzed, and then converted into some sort of findings that might interest somebody. Okay? So we're going to have a variety of different things, but they're all related to the theories that we've been talking about already, and they're going to, again, take it to the next level and show how the experiments or surveys or data actually shows or doesn't show what the theory was proposing. The assignment will be to talk about that, of course, and the main question is, so when we talk about a leadership style, is it simply somebody's opinion, or is it based upon some sort of empirical evidence? And so we're going to be talking about how testing the leadership theories, how does that contribute to the literature? Okay, so that's going to be the topic for the day, and I think you'll find it interesting. Now, this all fits into the dissertation process that I've been trying to relate through looking at the overall process and looking at the streams of literature and how the whole thing works. And this week I want to look at the third chapter of the dissertation, which is called the methodology. So once you've come up with your topic and you've got your literature streams, you're going to have to come up with some way of proving that your idea is actually the right idea, that it actually works. Okay? And then you're going to analyze the data, and then you're going to produce your findings. So methodology usually relates to which variables you're going to be observing. And variables, of course, are usually things that can be measured, and you'll be looking for dependent and independent variables. Okay? How are you going to measure those? How will the data be collected? What method of analysis is going to be performed? Okay, generally, if we're working with a quantitative style dissertation, you'll be using some sort of a statistical package to analyze the data, show whether there's levels of significance and confidence with regards to your hypotheses. And then finally, generally we can't control all variables within an experiment, even in the lab, so then you'll have to define what assumptions need to be made concerning extraneous variables and uncontrollable environmental variables. Okay, so basically this is the makeup of the methodology chapter, okay, in the dissertation. So, of course, the next step is to try to define independent, dependent, and extraneous variables. So here we have Mrs. Independent Variable and Mr. Dependent Variable, and she appears to be heading out the door and say, "Nothing you do affects me. I'm independent." And Mr. Dependent Variable says, "Well, some things you do affect me." But in addition to independent and dependent variables, many times we have what are called extraneous variables, things that we're really not interested in measuring, but they have an effect on the results. And here we have Mr. and Mrs. Variables again, but in this case they have a thunderstorm coming through their roof, which of course would change the relationship between them. Okay, so you generally have to account for the things that you can't control that might have an influence on either the independent or dependent variables. So here's a little diagram about how the whole thing works, and some of you may have seen this before, but I think it's worth reviewing as we go into our section on empirical testing. Now, I use the example from the Hawthorne experiments, the famous study that was done by Elton Mayo regarding the Chicago Hawthorne plant, where they built electrical motors and did electrical windings and armatures. Okay, so in this case, the independent variable the research worked with was lighting, although they used other things like temperature and things like that. But basically, they were trying to determine whether the level of lighting, which they could control as the independent variable, they could set it low or they could set it high, whether that had an effect on the dependent variable, which was the productivity the workers achieved in making these armatures. Okay, so they could set the lighting so low that the workers could hardly see what they were doing and measure how many armatures they could produce. Then they could turn the lighting up high so everything was brilliantly lit, and then measure how many armatures the workers could produce, thinking that, well, maybe we can identify a relationship between working conditions and productivity. The surprising thing was, which blew everybody's mind, was there appeared to be no relationship. Regardless of whether the lighting was low or the lighting was high, the productivity of the workers appeared to stay about the same. Okay. So then you have to ask, well, why was that the case? What else is going on that's causing productivity to stay the same? But then they also noticed that productivity was changing at other times, but not due to the lighting. And here we have the extraneous variables, which turned out to be defined as the relationships between the workers on the factory floor, between the relationship with the workers and their supervisors, and also, surprisingly, the relationship between the workers and the researchers. And it turns out the theory is that the workers showed higher productivity when they thought they were being observed and they were being paid attention to. Okay, so the idea is that the workplace is a social environment, whether it's a factory or an office or a grocery store or a lumber yard. Okay, and you work with other people, and those relationships are going to affect not only productivity but also satisfaction in the workplace, quality of work, general attitudes, and so that this became an important part of management theory, that human relations actually affect the workplace. And so consequently, it's a good idea to do as well as you can in establishing your relationships with your coworkers. So that's the way the experiment works. Okay, that's the way the relationship between independent and dependent variables works, and that's what you'll be looking for as you start to come up with your chapter 3 in your dissertation. You may have all the theory behind you, but when it comes to defining what your topic is, it's got to be something that you can measure to show that there's an effect between certain variables and other variables. So we're going to be looking ahead to the week 7 paper. There you're going to be writing an 8 to 10 page paper based upon the past 3 weeks of readings, which will be the narcissistic, the charismatic, and the testing, the empirical testing. And of course, you know, the theories are important. They're tied to the other theories, but as I've mentioned on the feedback on your papers, you know, we're really looking for something that ties things together as opposed to simply reviewing the literature and say this article said this author said this theory said this. That's describing. It shows me that you understand what it is, but since this isn't like a memorization test and you have all the material in front of you, simply taking out what's written on a piece of paper or on one screen and typing it into another screen doesn't really show me that you're moving beyond that simple descriptive part. Okay, so you're going to analyze the literature, add more literature from your research, and then combine it all together around a topic that you want to address within that general boundaries. Keys to success. Well, here we go back to Dilbert and Wally, and in this case they're talking to the intern ASIC, and Wally says the key to success, not caring what others think of you. Coincidentally, that's also the key to being totally useless. But the most important thing is that other people can't tell which way you're hoping it goes. Well, I think in addition to that we need to use the feedback and look at your previous work, both in the papers and in the discussion posts. I'll be, constantly giving you ways to improve your work and to take it from where you are right now to the next level. And always look for ways to improve. That's the whole point of writing multiple papers and having these discussions every week, as everything is getting better and should continue to move forward. So until next time, goodbye and good luck.